20 years ago, I moved to Alaska and started an adventure that turned into a way of life. My channel is all about sharing my experiences living in the northernmost state. Nothing in Alaska is easy. Some days are successes, some days are failures, but every day is an adventure. Please follow along with all my hunting, flying, fishing, harvesting, and DIY projects. I don't think you'll be disappointed. Welcome back to the channel. My name's Mike and you're watching The Only Carpenter. Today's video is going to be a little bit different than what the last few have been. We're going to go away from the tractor project for a while and do a couple other videos. So as promised, this one's going to be more geared towards Alaska life and what Alaska is and things like that. But before I dive straight into the topic today, I want to address a couple of comments that I got. I know that there's some background noise and you can hear chickens in the background on my videos. My chickens, yeah. They're going through some weird molting process where their feathers are falling out and they stop laying eggs, and they've been making more noise than usual. So I had a viewer told me I really needed to get a microphone of some type and wear a microphone to get a little better sound quality. Just letting them know I got one. I'm going to figure this thing out. I'm not super tech smart, so it'll take me a little bit, but I'll get this thing figured out and I'll have it in use soon. So I do listen to the comments, especially constructive criticism ones. So please leave comments. You know, I like all kinds of comments. And the thing is, the best thing about owning your own YouTube channel is if I don't like a comment, I can just delete it off there. So if he leaves it I don't like, I'll just delete it. But today's video, the title is Alaska Facts and Myths. So, I moved to Alaska 20 years ago. I moved up from what Alaskans call the lower 48. So that's just the 48 states that are south of Canada and north of Mexico. And they call it the lower 48 because it's lower on the globe and it's south of Alaska. So, anybody that comes from the lower 48 to Alaska, you may have heard this term before. So I came from the lower 48. All my family and most of my friends still live in the lower 48. They hit me up with questions all the time about Alaska. Some of the questions, you know, are ones that you understand and you get. Some of them are a little bit like, really? But in order to narrow down the amount of questions and get it to something that I could do a video on, and maybe like a half a dozen of them, I decided I would use comments that were left and then questions that people had asked me. And I also went, I just went online and I Googled Alaska. Now, when I Googled Alaska, I couldn't believe what the results were. And now presumably, right, when you Google something on the internet and the word almost auto-completes when you're typing it, I mean, that means that many other people have Googled that same thing, right? And then the responses and the answers and the common questions about Alaska, presumably, many people have asked those same questions. So some of these questions that you see on there just make you scratch your head. So we'll start out with the first one, and it's one of the most obvious ones, but we'll start out with it. Is Alaska part of the United States? Yes, Alaska is. It was the 49th state. It is definitely part of the United States. Now, we'll do a little history lesson here. So we'll go back. 1867, William Seward is the Secretary of State for the United States. He negotiates a deal to purchase Alaska, what's now the state of Alaska, from Russia. Most of us probably already know this, but I'll go through it. The purchase price that he negotiated was for $7.2 million for the whole state. So we'll do some math and some examples here in a second, but the bottom line is that was the deal of deals. $7.2 million in today's money is like right around $140 million. even at $140 million today's money, still, hands down, the deal of deals. And by the time I'm done telling you everything about Alaska, I think the average person would agree that it was a very good investment. However, even though he bought 700,000 square miles for 2 cents an acre, the American people weren't behind it, or at least a lot of Americans weren't behind it. They held protests. They went with picket signs. They said all kinds of things trying to stop the purchase. They didn't think that the U.S. should be spending $7.2 million on this north wasteland that seemed worthless. Nevertheless, the sale went through, and the United States made the purchase from Russia. Now remember, we were better friends with Russia back then. A lot of things hadn't happened, you know. This was before a couple of world wars, and this was when we were still on talking terms with them, and they'd sell us something, evidently. So the sale of Alaska went through, and the American people weren't happy. But it didn't take very long. So purchased in 1867, something happened not even 30 years later. In 1896, gold was discovered in the Klondike. This began to change the Americans' feelings towards Alaska. And of course, we had a gold rush occurred. People rushed up to Alaska for adventure and riches, and the sentiment about the value of the purchase began to change with the country. And it would only get better over time because many more things were going to happen. As time went on, the abundance of natural resources in Alaska began to be known. It just loaded with many fisheries that are still being catching fish today and supplying the country with food. And the United States tasked the military with going up and exploring large parts of Alaska. During those exploration missions, the military discovered even more natural resources. They discovered copper, and eventually the Kennecott mine was developed, which was one of the largest copper mines in North America. And they just continually began to find more and more and more worth in the state. And so that $7.2 million wasn't a big deal anymore. Meanwhile, we're going through a couple world wars and things are happening, and Alaska's gaining popularity. More and more people are moving to Alaska. In 1912, Alaska becomes a territory. Now this allows Alaska to do a lot of things. It can then kind of build its own government and become more of a part of the United States instead of just an area controlled by the United States. So it becomes a territory. More and more things are happening on the world stage. Another world war eventually happens, and the military or strategic importance of Alaska becomes very important to the United States. So now it's not only that it was a good purchase, now it's almost necessary for our safety and our way of life as a nation. We continue to march forward in time, and in 1959, Alaska finally gains statehood, becomes the 49th state. Some big things happen. In 1968-ish, they discover oil on the north slope of Alaska. So the north slope of Alaska is the northernmost region in Alaska. It's everything north of the Brooks Range, and that's where the huge oil fields are up in Prudhoe Bay. And that's what most people know Alaska for today, is its large oil reserves. So 1968, oil's discovered up there. It's one of the largest oil reserves in North America. They build the pipeline. They begin pumping it out, and Alaska really earns its keep now. So we back up a little bit, and we think about how Americans initially felt about the purchase of Alaska. They were totally against it, didn't want it, thought it was crazy, couldn't understand what in the world the government was thinking. I can't help but make a comparison here. Now, I hate to bring politics into my channel, and I'm not really, but I can't help but make a comparison to what's going on right now with Greenland. Many people are against the notion of the United States taking any kind of control over Greenland. However, I just wonder, and this is all I'm going to say about it, I just wonder if someday, if it happens, we won't look back and say that was one of the best decisions the United States ever made, and there was genius behind it. So, but that's it in a nutshell on Alaska being a state. Yes, it is definitely a state. and I'll have some videos, or I'll also have some slideshows here in a minute and some pictures and things that better help us understand and get a kind of a handle on Alaska and where it's at and things like that. But for now, we'll move on to the next question. Question number 2. Question number 2 on the list of Alaska facts / myths, the size of Alaska. Yes, Alaska is really big. I mean, if you cut Alaska, in half, Texas would be the 3rd largest state. But the easiest way to really get a good grip on Alaska is it's hard to look at maps, and I'll explain to you why. The world is round, right? It's a sphere. Sorry, all you flat earthers out there. It really is. It's a sphere, trust me. If you try to lay a sphere out flat on a flat map, it distorts a lot of the size of things on the map. So it's very hard to see the size of Alaska. The best way to do it is to take a 1-to-1 scale map and lay Alaska on top of the lower 48. We talked about that earlier, what that is. And you can really get the scale of the, get an idea of the size. From north to south, it's approximately 1,400 miles. And from east to west, it stretches almost 2,700 miles. So it's approximately 1/3 the size of the United States if you overlay Alaska on top of it. I mean, it's just massive. If you Google how big Alaska is, you're going to get some weird answers. I don't know why 700,000 square miles always pops up when you Google it, but in reality, my research shows that Alaska is closer to 586,000 square miles. The shoreline of Alaska, if you counted the islands, so if you counted, there's many islands that are parts of Alaska, like Kodiak and St. Paul and Little Diomede. If you count all those islands and the Aleutian Chain Islands, and you count up all of their coastline, it comes to 33,900 miles. That's more coastline than the rest of the entire United States, even if you count Hawaii. So Alaska really is huge. If you think about how scarcely populated Alaska is with its size, it almost makes it more daunting. There's somewhere around 738,000 people in Alaska, give or take, depending upon what the current census is. And there's roughly, say, just for easy math, there's 700,000 square miles. That's like a person per square mile. So it is the least densely populated state by far. If you factor in that there's very few roads in Alaska, there's one road system that runs from Anchorage up to Fairbanks, the Parks Highway. That's kind of the main artery. And then there's also the Glen Highway that shoots off and goes on kind of down the west side of Alaska. But that's really, for all intents and purposes, that's the main road in Alaska. If you go west of that road, there are no roads for the rest of the state. So the vast majority of the state just has no roads. I mean, there's communities there, and there's small towns and villages, and there's a large part of the state's populated with indigenous population of Alaska Natives. But the only way in or out of any of those communities is by air or water. I mean, you can take a boat to some of them. So the size of Alaska is truly amazing, and the only way you can really get a true handle on it is to come visit and fly around in an airplane, and you just can't believe you can fly for hours and hours and hours and never see anything below you. So Alaska, it's really big. Now we'll move on to the 3rd question. We'll talk about the weather around Alaska. So the extreme north part of Alaska, we talked about it earlier, it's called that North Slope. That's from the Brooks Range north. They probably have some of the coldest, darkest weather that we get. They go through a period in the wintertime when the sun doesn't come up for 90 days, and then they go through a period of time in the summer when what did I say, winter? Yeah, winter, the sun doesn't come up for 90 days. In the summertime, it doesn't set for 90 days. So they have extreme swings in daylight and darkness. Well, during that dark period in the winter, it gets very cold up in the North Slope. The interior of Alaska, which is, it's kind of hard to describe where interior is, but it basically Fairbanks, Alaska is in the interior, and then a stretch that stretches to the southwest down towards a community called McGrath. That section of Alaska is probably the coldest. The interior is away from the oceans, and the ocean doesn't affect the weather at all. So the temperature really sinks there. that's where you get your 60, maybe negative 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Those are where those extreme temperatures are experienced. As you move a little bit further south in Alaska and you come down what they call south central Alaska, that would be more like your Anchorage, Wasilla, Palmer area, and that's probably where the majority of the people in the state live. So Anchorage has approximately 250,000 people. The Matsu Valley, where Palmer and Wasilla are, probably has 100,000 people. So there's like 350,000, about half the population of the state lives in south central Alaska. The weather there is a little more moderate. The ocean's closer, and you do get cold days. It does snow, but it's not unusual in January to have a thaw and to have the snow melt. The average temperature in January, February is like 20 degrees above Fahrenheit. So it's much more moderate temperature there. Now we'll talk about a whole other part of Alaska that's almost not like Alaska. It's called Southeast Alaska, and that's that panhandle that stretches down to the southeast, down along Canada. It kind of stretches out towards Seattle. Southeast Alaska is like a totally another part of Alaska. It's completely on its own weather system. The weather there is much milder. It's up against the ocean. In parts of Southeast Alaska, they get so much rain that they're actually classified as a rainforest. So Ketchikan, check my math on this, but I think Ketchikan gets like 16 feet of rain a year. So tremendously wet, much more mild weather there, and it looks totally different too. So anybody that takes a cruise to Alaska and comes up what they call the inner passage or the inside passage coming up through Southeast and says that they've been to Alaska, well, I guess technically they have, but really they haven't seen Alaska. There's a whole bunch more to see other than Southeast. So that concludes the weather question. Okay, now we're to question number 4 that I get asked a lot about, and this is a big one. This is a myth/fact that a lot of people ask about Alaska. A lot of people have misconceptions about it. Do you get paid to live in Alaska? Short answer, yes. But there's a lot more to it. The little bit of money that Alaskans get paid every October in no way, shape, or form offsets what it costs to live in Alaska. The cost of living is very, very expensive. I think everybody knows about that. The groceries, gasoline, housing, heat, utility, everything. It's just so much more money than the average expense in the lower 48. I mean, there's places that are expensive in the lower 48 too, don't get me wrong. And there's places like, say, Hawaii that probably have a similar cost index or cost of living indexes to Alaska. But Alaska is expensive, and the small amount of money that we receive from our October checks is not that much. So we'll dive straight into it. So it's called the Alaska Permanent Fund. And what I'll do is I'll give you an overview of what it is, and then I'll go into the details. So the idea is that Alaska was producing a great deal of money from natural resources, oil, mining, things like that. The legislation in 1976, they voted to change the Constitution or make a constitutional amendment, I think, and it's Article 9, Section 15 of the Alaska State Constitution. And what it says is that they'll take a portion, approximately 25%, but I think it's actually less than that when you take out taxes and everything, but a portion of the revenue from the natural resources that the state produces, they'll set it aside and put it into a fund, a permanent fund. And this fund then will continue to grow from both being invested and growing from interest, and also from continually getting more money deposited into it. The initial amount that was deposited into the permanent fund was $734,000 in 1977. So after that, the money began to grow. They continued to add more money from the natural resources into it, and the fund grew. I mean, it's huge today. Over the years, this will give you a little bit of an idea about the amount that an Alaskan actually can get from the permanent fund. Over the years, the permanent fund has been as little as $200 or $300 to as much as $3,284 in 2022. Now, the reason that it's different all the time is because, one, the fund is growing and getting bigger, so then the dividend from it should be bigger, right? The other idea is what they do is they use it's kind of a complex formula, but they basically take an average of the performance of the permanent fund over a 5-year period, and then they divide what it profited off from the average 5-year period. They take that and they divide it by the number of eligible recipients in the state of Alaska, and that gives them the amount of the permanent fund that year. Now I'm going to tell you about more that's been happening lately. In the last just 3 or 4 years, and there's been some developments with the permanent fund that are really controversial, but we'll talk about that in a second. So they divide the average, the 5-year average over by the number of eligible recipients in the state, and then they come up with the number. Now we're talking about eligible recipients. So what does it take to be eligible to get the permanent fund in Alaska? 1, you need to be an Alaska resident, and the residency requirement is that you actually had to have been here a full calendar year the prior year. So you had to be here a full 12 months the year before, and then you're eligible for the next fall's PFD. Permanent fund dividends called the PFD. So other things that can make you ineligible are certain crimes. So if you commit like a felony in Alaska and you're convicted of a felony, you can be ineligible and not able to draw the permanent fund. And then if you leave the state for more than so many days a year, you're not supposed to be eligible to get the PFD check that year. So now, what's been going on with the permanent fund dividend in the last couple of years? So Alaska, like all other states, has financial trouble, right? The state's budget is normally more than its budget that it has to spend, and so it's spending more than the revenue that it's bringing in from different things. Important things to know about Alaska is Alaska does not have a state income tax, so that automatically takes that source of revenue off the table. Alaska does have property taxes, but only in some areas. So like in the Mat-Su Valley, Palmer, Wasilla, Anchorage area, Fairbanks, there's property taxes on the land there. But a vast majority of the state, by area, the most of the state has no property taxes. So you also lose out on that source of revenue. However, the state is rich in natural resources. So it can tax the oil companies that are doing business, say on the North Slope, pulling the oil out of the ground. They'll tax them, and then the state uses that money to run on. Well, over the years, slowly, like most states, it's spending more than it's taking in. So the last 3 or maybe 4 years, what the idea was, they would take a portion of everyone's PFD check in the fall, and they would put it into the general fund and basically use it to balance the budget and run the government. So the last 3 or 4 years, the PFD has been capped at around $1,000 for each person. It doesn't matter what that 5-year average number come up to, they're only going to give each person $1,000, and then the rest of it they put into the general fund to run the government. Now, I mean, right, wrong, or indifferent, I'm not going to argue what I personally think about it, but that's what they're doing to balance the budget. I mean, the bottom line is the state has to have money to run on. We all enjoy the things that taxes and government money pays for, the roads and schools and everything else. So it is what it is kind of deal. You know, if it was between implementing a state income tax and starting to tax my income, or just use the PFD, I mean, I would be in favor of just using the PFD, because if they implement a state income tax, that's going to cost me personally a lot more money than just taking the PFD each fall. So there you have it. Do Alaskans get paid to live here? Yes. Does it offset what it costs to live in Alaska? No. Number 5. This really isn't a question that I've been asked a lot, but when I did the Google search about Alaska, this popped up, and it seemed like something people probably are curious about. I know I would have been. Number 5, can you flag down a train in Alaska? Answer is yes. The Alaska Railroad runs from Seward up to Fairbanks. And as it treks along through the remote parts of Alaska, it cuts through communities that are completely isolated and cut off from road service. So the specific area of the rail that's probably most utilized as a flag stop or flagging down a train is between Talkeetna and Hurricane. And in that area, there are remote cabins, no way to get to them. And the people there can flag the train down. The train will stop, pick them up, and take them either up to Fairbanks or back down to Anchorage, either direction that they want to go. Now, what it actually looks like, I'm not sure. I've never flagged down a train myself. I'm envisioning someone standing down the track with a flag and waving it. The conductor sees it and he stops the train. And that's how it's been described to me. These flag stops are fairly common, believe it or not. The train does more than just pick people up and drop them off, though. It also is a vital way for supplies to get to those remote communities. So the train will actually haul cargo and stop right in any, just a random spot. It'll use a crane, unload the supplies down under the ground, and you can have your construction supplies or anything else you want delivered by train that way. So it's kind of a fascinating thing. The Alaska Railroad's a really neat thing. It runs, like I said, from I think Seward up to Anchorage, through Wasilla, Talkeetna, all the way to Fairbanks. And it has some beautiful scenery it goes through. They have glass top train cars, they have dining cars. It's kind of a really neat thing to do if you ever get a chance. And this part I'm not 100% sure about, but I tried to research whether or not anywhere else in North America you could flag down a train still. I couldn't find anywhere. I don't believe you can do it in Canada. I don't believe there's anywhere in the lower 48 that you can do it. So I think Alaska is the last place in North America left that you can flag down a train. Number 6. This question's been asked to me quite a few times personally, and it did pop up on the Google search, so it's worthy of the video today. Number 6. Are there really more bears than people in Alaska? So earlier we talked about the population of Alaska, and we know that there's 738,000, something like that. 730,000-ish people in Alaska. For the math for this discussion, we'll just say there's 700,000 people in Alaska. All right, are there more bears than people? Well, I'll give you the numbers on the bears, and then we'll explain. So there's roughly 100,000 black bears. And remember, these numbers are done by biologists with aerial surveys, and like the stats from hunters are turned in. So these numbers, are not exact. There's no way to know exactly how many bears are here. But they estimate that there's 100,000 black bears in the state of Alaska. They estimate that there's 30,000 brown bears in the state of Alaska. And then the polar bear population is really up for debate. And I'm guessing that's because those animals are even so much harder to count. But there's estimated between 4,000 and 7,000 polar bears in Alaska. So if you add that up, you come up to 137,000 bears total in Alaska. So if there's 700,000-ish people, 137,000 bears, you can see there's significantly fewer bears than there are people in Alaska. However, with all that being said, Alaska is the only state that has all three species. They have black, brown, and polar bear. It's definitely the state with the highest ratio of bears to people, because there's only 700,000 people, and if there's 137,000 bears, that's actually a high ratio of bears to people. So with that being said, may not be more bears than people, but there's definitely the most bears per person out of the country. Your odds of coming into Alaska on vacation or on a trip and seeing a bear is decent. If you go to any of the different kinds of tourist activities, maybe you hired an airplane to take you to bear viewing, or you took a boat tour or something like that, significantly increases your odds. If you happen to go through Denali State Park, your odds of seeing a bear are fairly good there. Just driving around Alaska, your odds of seeing a bear are actually kind of low, but you never know, you could get lucky. And the odds of seeing a polar bear if you come to Alaska are very thin. I've lived here 20 years, and I spend a significant amount of time traveling around the state. I've been to pretty much every corner of Alaska, and I have seen 2 polar bears, and one was at a dump. So I don't know if that really counts. It wasn't in the wild, it was eating in a dump. So I've seen two polar bears in 20 years. On the contrary, black bears and brown bears, I've seen thousands. So, we do have a lot of bears. We just don't have more bears than people. So we don't have more bears than people, and this last is just more of a tidbit. This really wasn't a question that anybody's asked me, but while I was researching the bear numbers, I also pulled up the moose numbers. So just as a gee whiz thing, there's about 200,000 moose in Alaska. So 700,000 people, 200,000 moose. I mean, the moose to people ratio is pretty high. Your odds of seeing a moose if you come on vacation to Alaska are just about 100%. As a matter of fact, if you happen to fly commercial into Anchorage and land there, you're probably going to see a moose before you leave town, because there are thousands of moose that actually live right in town. And just for a gee whiz thing also, Anchorage claims that there's about 300 bears that live in the city limits of Anchorage. So your odds of seeing a moose are very good before you leave Anchorage, and you might even see that only bear you see during your trip in Anchorage before you leave. But that's the wildlife stats for Alaska. All right, this is one of the culprits of all the noise making in the background. This is Charlotte. She's one of my laying hens. She's probably my favorite out of all of them. She's the tamest and definitely has been handled the most, but she's not doing it as bad. Her feathers aren't coming out like the other ones are, but they are going through some sort of a change. These chickens are about almost 10 months old now, and they did begin losing their feathers, and they really began slowing down on their laying of eggs. But so I don't know. My father-in-law, he's an expert in chickens, and he's been telling me all about it. But I don't know at some point if we'll need to rotate out this group of hens and get a different group so we can keep our egg production going or not. But somehow or other, Charlotte's going to make the cut and probably be able to stay around because she's definitely my favorite. What are you looking at? But if you've been hearing them in the background, this is what you're hearing, is this gal. Right, Charlotte? Say hi.